So this is Mark 1, 29 to 39, and I'm reading from the Common English Bible. After leaving the synagogue, Jesus, James, and John went home with Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed, sick with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once. He went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. The fever left her, and she served them. That evening, at sunset, people brought to Jesus those who were sick or demon-possessed. The whole town gathered near the door. He healed many who were sick with all kinds of diseases, and he threw out many demons. But he didn't let the demons speak because they recognized him. Early in the morning, well before sunrise, Jesus rose and went to a deserted place where he could be alone in prayer. Simon and those with him tracked him down. When they found him, they told him, "Everyone's looking for you." He replied, "Let's head in the other direction, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there too. That's why I've come." He traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and throwing out demons. We find the disciples here getting into Jesus' work. We're journeying through the book of Mark together, and we've had this opportunity to kind of follow the narrative. Sometimes when we just read bits and pieces, then we can't really tie them together. But when we string these stories together, then we see the connection, and we can sometimes feel a little bit more connected to the characters as well as the story. But it isn't long. This is already Mark 1. This is the first chapter of Mark. Jesus has just called his first 4 disciples. Last week we talked about Jesus in the synagogue and how Jesus demonstrated authority first over the text, authority of a teaching style, and then authority over the demons, over the evil spirits. And the disciples were just called the week before that in our timeline. So just a few verses ago, these disciples were called, the 4 that are mentioned here, James and John, Simon and Andrew. They've only been following Jesus for a little while, and they were beckoned to come, to follow him. Drop your nets, leave behind what you're doing, and follow Jesus. Now, I've heard many of your stories, and I know that you've had some of those moments too, where someone reached out to you, and they said some variation of, "Come, follow me." Now, maybe that was a marriage proposal. Maybe that was a job offer. Maybe that was an opportunity to study or to travel or invest money. And you felt like maybe you didn't have enough time to evaluate the pros and the cons. You didn't have enough information, and you didn't know for sure, but you had a good feeling, and so you went along with it. And at first it seemed good, and then a little bit of hesitation set in. I've had a few of those moments myself that I can remember. As a kid, there was a neighborhood, a group of us boys, kind of all roughly the same age, and we knew that there was a squabble, a disagreement between a couple of boys. And so one of the boys was going to go to the other boy's house and argue with him, maybe fight, whatever. And we heard this was happening, so we all wanted to go and see what was happening. Well, when we arrived at the other boy's house, he looked out the window and he couldn't tell how many of us were going to fight him. So of course he stayed in the house. And as soon as we saw his face, he looked out the window. As soon as I saw his face, I knew it was a mistake to be there. Because I had thought, oh, this would be fun to see. I want to see how this plays out. I'm not going to get involved one way or another. But as soon as I saw his fear, then I realized, oh, okay. No, I've been lured into this by power, by the idea of violence, and that should have been a red flag early on, but I missed it. But another time, I'm sure you've got lots of these too, but I had no plans for a weekend back in my college days where I was a little more flexible. No plans at all. Some people were going hiking, and was I interested? Well, yeah, sure, I'll pack my things. I hopped in the car. An hour before, I didn't know what I was doing, but all of a sudden I was on this trip. I'd never hiked that trail before, and the views were amazing. Now, along the way, I felt hesitation. There were red flags. Oh, how much climbing is there to do? Nobody else brought snacks. What are we going to eat? Right? All of these red flags, and you're hungry, and you're tired, and you're sweating, and you're not walking with the people you wanted to walk with, and then it feels like, this is a mistake. It seems to me that the disciples are probably seeing some of those red flags by now. Because they've agreed to follow this teacher. Now, there may have been some buildup. There may have been some rumors among the community. Hey, did you hear about Jesus? Yeah, Mary and Joseph's son. Yeah, he started talking more spiritually. I think he's going to kind of start a movement. He's going to become a rabbi. Whatever. There might have been some of that. We don't know. The gospel writers haven't told us. But Jesus shows up, and Simon and Andrew, they're going to leave their father behind, James and John. They're going to leave their father Zebedee behind. They're going to follow Jesus. And they're ready to learn, and they're excited, and they get to the synagogue with Jesus. Of course, they're close to him because they're with him, they're following him. It's kind of this mutually beneficial thing. Jesus looks more credible because he has followers. These guys who were fishermen just days ago, now they're students, and they're studying, and they're ready to follow Jesus and learn from him. So they get to the synagogue, and Jesus is teaching with power. He's telling the people parts of their own scriptures they didn't know. They hadn't had anybody tell them those things before. So everybody is amazed. And it says, earlier in Mark 1, it says that the crowd was amazed. And to the disciples, they must have been looking around thinking, man, we made the right choice. We're following the right guy. This is going to be great. He's going to be the most popular guy around. And then the higher he's lifted up, we're going to be lifted up. We're going to be on his left and right in this new era that he's bringing in. But then the red flags start. So this is still last week's passage, but there's a person with an evil spirit who we don't really know much about. That in the Old Testament there isn't really the same kind of demon possession. We don't really see it in the culture that we live in now. So we sort of have to fill in some blanks with our own creativity. But there's a man with a spirit, and the spirit challenges Jesus, and Jesus has authority over the spirit, and the spirit leaves the man. And this miraculous power continues in this story. But if one of you were to stand up and start yelling at me, or someone else were to come in the door, I haven't arranged that, although that would be a fun effect maybe, all of you would be awkward and uncomfortable. And you would start to think, maybe I should have stayed home this morning. Right? That tension in the room can make us uncomfortable, make us less worshipful, less appreciative of what's happening. So here are the disciples, and they're like, oh man, what's going to happen? This guy is clearly not right in the head, the person who's yelling. So is Jesus engaging with this person with the bad spirits? Just get the security to take the guy out. But Jesus engages with the spirit, challenges the spirit, and the spirit leaves. Oh, okay. Then it almost creates more questions than answers. But it seems, okay, reassuring. This is good, but we still don't know some things. Why did Jesus tell the spirit to be quiet? The spirit knew who Jesus was. Shouldn't he have allowed the spirit to say, we know who you are, Holy One of God? Then, everyone else would have to believe them. So the disciples have to be weighing all of these things. But they seem to know, and these stories seem to be written almost from their perspective, this kind of intimate account, that they seem to know that the demon recognized Jesus. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know, sometimes the things we see and experience early on are green flags. And this happens in school. You have a teacher who's funny, who doesn't care about deadlines, and calls students by nicknames. You think, oh, this teacher is cool. And then the other teacher who sometimes gets mad and is strict about deadlines, that teacher was boring, embarrassing, and we were sort of afraid of that teacher. Well, down the road you get a job and all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, deadlines do matter, right? And all of a sudden you start to see it totally the other way. What was a green flag before is now a red flag. So, Jesus arrives in the home of Simon's mother-in-law. And I like to read Scripture with a straight face, but every now and then it feels like a funny story is just waiting to be told. It's almost cliche, it's overdone to tell mother-in-law jokes. But Simon is in the home of his mother-in-law, and I feel like there's a funny story there. Simon has just quit his job. He's quit his job, he's not fishing anymore, he's following Jesus around. Well, how does that pay? It doesn't. He's walking around essentially homeless, and now he's in the home of his mother-in-law. I think his mother-in-law had an opinion about Simon giving up his job. And it probably wasn't as spiritual as our opinion about Simon giving up his job. And now the mother-in-law is sick. So I can just imagine the conversation. And again, this is my imagination, because sometimes I just want there to be funny things. But Simon gets to the house, they're close by, and there could have been a conversation ahead of time. Jesus says, hey, do we know anybody who lives nearby here? Well, yeah, Simon, my wife's family lives here. Oh, well, let's go there. Well, I don't know. She's a little bit upset about me quitting and everything. And my wife said she's a little sick, so she couldn't cook for us anyway. Maybe let's go somewhere else. Well, no, they show up. So Simon just shows up. Not only does he just show up, but he brings 4 of his friends along. All of them also homeless and unemployed. And here she is in bed with a fever. When you're in bed with a fever, you don't want a whole bunch of people mucking around the house, making noise. So Simon has already struck out by quitting his job. He's already a disappointment to his mother-in-law in all of these ways. And so Simon says, okay, everybody, just keep it down. She's sick. She's still a little bit upset about the quitting thing, so let's just give her some space. And Jesus says, no, let's go talk to her. So, red flag. Again, no, Jesus, I didn't want to bother her. Right? Red flag at first. Now, all of this comes, I think, out of this, the contrast for me was Jesus' invitation to the fishermen, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. We're going to do a new thing. We need you to recruit people, and we're going to create this new movement, this new kingdom. You're going to be a big part of it. Except they're not doing any of that. So at the synagogue, yep, Jesus is teaching, and everybody's impressed. And there are potential followers in that crowd. But then he's actually out and he's doing work. He's not doing a sales pitch. He's not just teaching. He is teaching, but he's doing more than that. So Jesus wants his disciples to know that the journey, the kingdom journey, doesn't just end with ideas. They are doing things. So they get to the mother-in-law's house. Jesus heals her. And all of a sudden, everything is fine, and she cooks for them. Now she can see, oh, he didn't just quit his job and abandon his responsibilities to my daughter. He's following a healer. He's following a good and wise man. Now all of a sudden she gets it. Well, the story goes on. Jesus is going from there, and the word has spread. Even though Jesus said to the demon, told the demon to be quiet, even though this healing happened in private, in their home, word is getting out, right? Jesus is taking efforts to keep this quiet, which also seems to go against that recruitment thing, right? Jesus says, hey, we're going to be fishers of people, but we're not going to tell, we're not going to advertise. Okay, but that's sort of how this works. We're supposed to tell everybody, right? Well, no, that's not what Jesus is doing. So people are coming and he's healing them. He's casting out demons from these people. And more people are coming. So Jesus decides he needs to take a break, and they go out into the wilderness, to the desert, and Jesus wakes up early in the morning to pray. And he's out long enough. The disciples wake up. The other people are coming with the sick and the demon-possessed still, and they can't find Jesus. Where is he? Well, finally they find him and they say, Jesus, everybody's looking for you. Right? Remember the fishers of people? They're coming. We've cast the nets. They're coming. So now we get to collect the fish that you told us to collect. And Jesus says, yeah, I think we're going to go to the next town. So all of this almost double speak. The disciples must be wondering, is this a red flag or a green flag? Because when Jesus encounters the new demons, again, he tells them to be quiet because they also recognize him. And he tells them to be quiet. He doesn't want word to get out the wrong way, but somehow it's still getting out. There's a big impulse in our lives too, even from our reading of these same stories. We think, oh, we've got to go tell everybody. We've got to evangelize and witness, and then we'll be good Christians. Well, that is one of the things that Jesus got his disciples to do, but it isn't the only thing. And lots of times, Jesus tells people not to tell everyone. So, some of you are saying, oh, we aren't supposed to tell other people about Jesus. We don't need to invite people to church. Well, I don't want you to feel guilty like you're a bad person if you don't. We've got room for people if you want to invite people. But the things that Jesus and his followers are doing go so far beyond teaching and advertising and recruiting that the kingdom is growing in new and different ways. It isn't just advertising. It isn't just inviting. It's healing and restoring and building people up from what they were. The disciples have signed up for this, and they almost certainly had no idea what was involved. We kind of like to know what's coming. We get to analyze, we get to criticize, we get to make solid opinions about which decisions we're making and what paths we're going to take. But sometimes the path changes even though we're already walking. The path of walking with Jesus is more about building up hope than saying the right words. It's more about healing and growing with people than it is about convincing and winning converts. When Jesus called his disciples and he told them they were going to fish for people, they may very well have thought, okay, we're going to be out in the streets preaching and handing out pamphlets and whatever. None of that was happening. Jesus was preaching, and he was preaching definitively with authority. But the work that they did was much more about building up. And also building themselves up, taking care of themselves. Jesus grew tired. He was a human being. And so he rested. He needed to rest. And he went from place to place to be in new situations, to create new relationships, to do new things instead of just following into the same patterns. So this is a short look at this story, but I want us to, as we think about what it means for us to follow Jesus, think about what it meant for James and John and Simon and Andrew to follow Jesus. What did it mean for them to fish for people? because they're not just preaching. They're not just evangelizing. All of the good news they are delivering, which is the meaning of the word evangelizing, they are bringing good news by healing and helping and making sure that they are rooted and grounded through prayer and rest as well. So, think about this story. Think about the ways that in your moments of invitation that you've had to evaluate red flags and green flags and look for the green flags in Jesus' call to serve him. Amen.